really isn't anymore. That's it. Saltwater, freshwater, frozen water, water in the interstitial spaces between grains of sand. That's a real limit. The white ball on the right, that's our atmosphere. It doesn't grow, it doesn't, we can't create and engineer more of it. That's all there is. So the question for us today as designers, all of us are designers, whether you call yourself that officially on your business card or not. We're all designers of our own lives, of our own behaviors that affect others and their behaviors. What does it mean to live on a planet with these limits and boundaries, yet to create conditions that are conducive to life? Because we know that's what life does. That's what life has done. That's why life has flourished for the last 10 months on this planet. So if life has learned to do this, to live in this limited world without oil, couldn't we? Because we are human, after all, right? So what does it mean to be human? Well, I had you stand up in the beginning to remind yourself you are biological beings. You are one of those 300 million species. And as Fritz reminded us earlier, we are nature. There is no separation. It may feel like that when you live in an urban environment. Nature's out there, I'm going to this weekend to be with nature. No, you're with nature all the time. And because we are nature, what we make is natural. All right? You may be going, what? This microphone is natural because it is an extension of me as nature. It is an artifact that my species has created. This room, these lights, the computers that we make, they're all natural. But the problem is that these strategies that we've made are really maladapted strategies. All right? It's a way of being on this planet that's natural, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's guaranteed sustainable. Right? So really what it is about is let's move ourselves from a place in which we design things that don't fit in to a place in which we are well adapted. To me, that is a better design. That's the best design, is a well-adapted design. So let's look at what that might mean. This is really what I'm here talking about is biomimicry at all levels. And the shortest definition of it is the conscious emulation of nature's genius. And those 4 words are actually very carefully chosen. So conscious implies intent. We actually decide to go and emulate. It's not a happenstance and, oh wow, this kind of looks like a frog, therefore it must be biomimicry. No, there's the conscious intent. Emulation is also really important. Emulate is not to photocopy. It's not to make something look like nature, but to function like nature, right? To pull out those deep principles. You saw the little picture of the airplane and the winglet flipped up on that airplane. The engineers are quite proud of themselves for having come up with that design. It's 10, 15% improvement in some cases. But had they been hanging out and watching the big soaring birds, they would have recognized that particular technology was invented about 50 million years ago. And all vultures, all eagles, the ends of their feathers flip up. Pulling that deep principle is an emulation of nature's genius. And nature's genius is based on the idea that, well, okay, she's been around a little longer than we have, and therefore she probably has figured a few things out. That's what natural selection is about. Keep what works, throw out what doesn't. So maybe there is some genius in there. But in order to do this, we have to quiet our cleverness. We actually have to set aside our egos and get off of our pedestals and be willing to admit that we actually don't know what we're doing and that we need some help. All right? And now children are in this mindset all the time, right? They know they don't know, and they ask, Mama, how does this work? This is actually my daughter. I think I probably get 27 questions every hour. How does this work? Because she wants to learn how to fit in this world. But as an adult, We reward each other for what you already know. Not what you're learning, but what you already know. So quieting that cleverness is the most important first step. Now, biomimicry is an emerging discipline in terms of being an intentional practice, but it's actually very much a deep remembering of who we are as a species. We've actually always looked to nature. The early Inuits living up north, they built out of snow, not just because it happened to be everywhere they looked, but they actually turned to the polar bears and learned from the polar bears how to best use that snow for shelter. The early peoples that moved into the San Luis Valley in Colorado about 800 years ago had no idea how cold the winters would be, how warm the summers would be. They went out and measured the depths of the bedroom chambers of the Columbia ground squirrel. And they found out that they were consistently about 40 centimeters deep, 30 to 40 centimeters. They took that 30 to 40 centimeters, and that's how thick they made their adobe walls. So it's very much reminding ourselves that others have been here before us and may have figured it out already. So we look to nature as a model, measure, and mentor. It's very different from the Industrial Revolution when it was about what we could take. We are leaving an era of extraction and moving into an era where we say, can we actually just borrow your recipe? We don't necessarily want all of your ingredients just to use. It's actually rather crude to just steal those ingredients. The elegance is in understanding the recipe. And there's a number of different ways in which people are actually practicing this, all right? They might be mimicking form. All right, literally the shape, because nature uses shape all the time to achieve function, right? It's not just because a leaf is beautiful, but that's an optimal shape for that particular species in that particular environment. So emulating those forms is a great way to start. It's easy. We can measure, we can manufacture, we can sort of imagine how shape might work. A little bit harder is to mimic not just what nature has made, but how has she gone about making it? Right? So it's one thing to just take that form and copy it, but did you still use traditional heat, beat, and treat to make it? Or did you create it out of sunlight using readily abundant materials? And probably the hardest to do is to also mimic ecosystem, not just how it was made, what shape it takes, but how does it fit in the larger context? What are those questions? What happens to it at the end of the life? What is the full supply? It's not a supply chain. It's not a supply line, it's a supply web. And what does that look like? And how can we design to accommodate that? So I'm going to give you some examples, because it's not just this hypothetical space I'm talking about. This is happening now. On the left, that's a close-up of a moth eye. Moths, when they fly at light, they don't want any moonlight to reflect, because then the predators get them. Solar cells would love to not have any reflection because they can capture that light and be much more efficient. So moth eye and Marag have developed a surface, a nano surface for solar cells that works like the moth eye. Dysol, on the right, is probably the closest that anybody has come to artificial photosynthesis at a manufacturing scale, really using the idea of pigments, not chlorophyll, but pigments that are excitable, and when that energy collapses back down, they can capture that energy. And soon to be